You can't replace part of the brain. Like,
you treat them the same.
Source of truth for the medtech industry.
Coexists with the puppets.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the medtech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the $90 billion company. They had help up high, a lot of things.
State of Medtech with your host, Omar M. Khatib.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm really excited for today's episode. We love having investors on. Today's investor is coming from a really unique background and a really unique point of view. If you haven't subscribed to it already, he was on the cover of The Lens, which is a great magazine by LSI. I only have one magazine subscription and it's that one. And so if you want to learn more, you can go to, and I should have had this, you can go to lifesciencemarketresearch.com and go ahead and click the magazine tab, or just go to lifesciencemarketresearch.com/magazine and subscribe to the magazine. So that being said, today's guest, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on him, is Alan Cohen, who's the general partner of DCVC. He's focusing on an array of AI-enabled health tech, energy, security, and enterprise opportunities that are transforming industries. So in addition to his board roles, he works across different portfolio companies on product market fit, go-to-market strategy, and executive leadership development, and has led DCVC's successful exits at Element AI, Evolve, which on the NASDAQ is EVLV, and Caption Health. He's been a successful entrepreneur, tech executive, and board member for over 25 years for a range of iconic companies, which include DCVC-backed Lumio, Nikira, which is acquired by, what's that? Nicira. God, I got to get better.
That's a tough one. No, that's a tough one. Yeah.
Which is acquired by VMware. Thank you, Alan. Aerospace acquired by Cisco, where he led a $25 billion enterprise marketing and solutions organization. General Growth Partners and IBM. He's authored over 200 articles, undertaken over 1,000 press interviews, and delivered over 100 keynotes at industry conferences. Lastly is that he's got a bachelor's degree in English from SUNY Buffalo, a master's degree in English from University of Vermont, and a master's degree in international affairs and economics from the American University School of International Service, and an MBA from NYU. And in addition to his DCVC responsibilities, he's also a member of the advisory committee for the Secure Community Network, a mentor of the NYU-backed Endless Frontier Labs, and an advisor to Black Women on Board. So, Alan, thank you so much for joining the show. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you. It's Friday, right?
It's Friday, yeah. And I got to say, I think there might be some kind of trend with guys who have a background in English and then going into technology, because one of my favorite technology authors who's influenced my work and millions of others people is Jeffrey Moore, who has, I think, a PhD in literature from Stanford. So he was actually an English and literature guy before he went into technology. And you're the second guy I'm meeting like that. So there must be some kind of trend here. So
yeah, Jeffrey's a friend of mine, actually. And I think we tend to focus on how people understand things as opposed to purely just how does the technology work.
Yeah. No, I love it. One day we should definitely do one with both of you guys on. So let's, getting into how this came about, I reached out because, you were the cover story of LSI, and the cover story was what the TechMed revolution means for healthcare. TechMed, not medtech. And so maybe to start, tell us what exactly is TechMed and how is it different from medtech?
Right. So, I'll usually, you force me to think about my literature background, right? So to quote Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, I came not to bury medtech, but to praise it. And if you think about the healthcare field, it is a very enormous part of the American economy, right? There's just trillions of dollars at work, very important, right? It's a very big part of our economy. But when you look at the technology side of things, what we've seen over the last 50 years is a lot of kind of incremental invention, right? Better than X. And it's an industry that starts with a basis of need and then looks for technology that can support continued evolution, the ability to care for patients, deliver better therapeutics, outcomes, surgery, et cetera. We come at it the other way. We're basically tech nerds, and the DC and DCVC stands for Data Collective. So my firm were very early investors in the infrastructure of what used to be called big data. So we were seed investors in Databricks, Confluent, Elastic, a lot of the companies that have kind of built some of the building blocks for what we're talking about now in generative AI, et cetera. So when we look at the industry, we're looking at tech companies that have invented or used technologies that were invented in this, not necessarily for healthcare, but are then being applied. We have a couple of examples. I think some of them are in the article. Our company, Proprio, where I, sit on the board, which is probably well known to your community. This is a company that the technology was incubated in the sensor lab at the University of Washington. And then this pediatric neurosurgeon, Sam Brown, kind of walks down the block and says, well, I could probably use this to better visualize and perform surgery. And the founding team came together, including the CEO, Gabe Jones, and Ken Denman, the chairman, and they spun what is now today the kind of leading surgical navigation system from Proprio out of the sensor lab at UW. We have another company, Remedy Robotics, which is actually the CEO speaking at LSI this week. David Bell, he's a cardiac surgeon, but his focus was actually on autonomous driving and self-driving cars. So the inspiration for the innovation comes from an emerging technology that's being applied in that, as a primary driver in that environment. We also look in TechMed of companies that have some form of proprietary data set or data advantage for building the goods and services that they're building in it. So it's very data centric first and very technology centric first. So that's really the principal drivers of TechMed, which is obviously just a spin on medtech. There's a similar parallel system in what we call tech bio. We were early investors in Recursion Pharmaceutical. Recursion is a company that is using effectively in silico models to create small molecule therapeutics and treatments. So instead of pure kind of people with droppers and beakers and microscopes, you have giant data models kind of inventing molecules. They have the largest data center in the world in pharmaceutical industry at NVIDIA. So it's kind of compute first. Plenty of scientists, plenty of doctors, plenty of researchers that are part of the company. So it fits very well. I mean, everyone in the world thinks about Gen AI and large language models, and this is a lot more of what I see in TechMed. Is more like physical AI. And that's true. Traditionally, that's kind of very focused on either robots or autonomous systems like self-driving cars.
Got it. Something on that note, something that stood out to me, what I really liked was that in your interview on LSI, one of the things that you described was that you described TechMed as a speciation event emerging from medtech. So I'm wondering, what fundamental shifts do you think will define tech med companies compared to your traditional med tech companies? And how do you think established players can essentially avoid being obsolete? Because that's one of the things that I'm seeing is that with a lot of traditional med device companies, they're either having difficulty competing or even raising money because they don't have essentially some digital or data component that makes them a lot more attractive to investors.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's very hard, I think. So so I'm a fan of Darwin. Actually, Jeffrey Moore wrote a book called Dealing with Darwin.
I have it right there.
Right. So, when if you have various, I mean, you may have variations, but if, among the same species, kind of the alpha tends to win, right? Biggest, strongest, fastest. And so in an industry segment, we have giant medtech companies and they use their muscle. And their innovation, to be fair to them, right, to win, but they do it in a very certain way. And if you're going to compete in a different way, right, you have to kind of branch off and find a different way. I'm a longtime season ticket holder of the Golden State Warriors, right? And we rebuilt the basketball game. It's still basketball and still fundamentally almost played exactly the same way. But we got this skinny young kid from Davidson College, 16 years ago named Steph Curry, who could shoot the ball from anywhere in the court and never stopped moving. So he changed how the game was played. And actually last night he hit 4,000 points. So it was a really fun game to be at. And so I think you actually have to enter the market, effectively play the game differently. So you start with a data first type of mentality in the development of products and services. You don't collect data afterwards. And sometimes I will see a great, really interesting medtech company, and I'll say, well, what's your data strategy? Because we're going to work on it next. And that's obviously, for me as an investor, is a huge red flag. So companies built with data-centric strategies first that are taking advantage of these force multiplying technologies. There's an immense amount of computing power. You can buy an NVIDIA chip staple to device and do real-time processing of these large data sets in real time. So I think you have to start in a Darwinian way from a different place. Sometimes it's easier for startups, a little harder for Clayton Christensen theory here. Large companies, if you're a large publicly traded medical devices company, it's really hard to, blow up your existing product line and then change it because you got to report your earnings. It's like, oh yeah, we're gonna rebuild our entire business. Interesting ways I think you can do it, and I went through this. One of my early startups, a company called Airspace, which was a wireless LAN system. It was a company in 18 months. We went from zero to $40 million run rate. It was one of the first enterprise Wi-Fi systems that allowed large companies, campuses, to actually deploy Wi-Fi and centrally manage it. And we won Microsoft as Airspace. It was the largest wireless LAN deployment customer in the world. And Cisco said that's enough. They had a $500 million business, so they bought our company. But they did something really interesting. They put us in charge. They removed the existing management team and put us in place. We repurposed a $500 million business into a new model and a new technology set and a new approach. So if you're a startup or an early stage company, you better have those pieces in place today. And if you're an incumbent, you're going to need to do some radical surgery. And you're going to have to be able to explain to your shareholders why you want to make that change. The bio industry is actually quite good at it, right? There's a lot of biotech companies that, for example, we were investors in Abcellera, which was the first major monoclonal antibody treatment to COVID, and it was taken to market by Lilly. Lilly invested in them, co-invested with us. They went public eventually. So I think you have to kind of look at the new structures, and if there's a new species you might have to figure out how to play nice and work with them as opposed to just figuring out how to crush them like you do your normal incumbent. So I think there are some new models that allow you to get there. Traditionally, it's been by acquisition, but you actually have to change your mindset because sorry to make this a long story. When my company was acquired by Cisco, one of the executives there said, look, your job is to drive our other $10 billion business, which was the desktop networking business. You won't remember this, probably you were young, but people used to plug their laptop into their desk before there was Wi-Fi. And I told this executive, my job is not to augment your business. My job is to put your business out of business. No one is ever going to plug in again. And
I love that.
yeah, no, I mean, it's obviously it's more of a tech. Tech is a much rougher game, but in that context, you also have to do all the same things we do in this industry. Like you need FDA approval, you can't hurt people, you can't run fast and break things because it affects people's lives. So it is a bit of a speciation event because there's a new emerging set of technology companies that are competing, but they also have to maintain the equities of actually serving human beings and not doing any harm.
Yeah, and I think the industry as a whole, separate from TechMed, is definitely going through a speciation event. Like we're seeing in the last year or two, a lot of companies divest different businesses, right? Like I think it's really interesting. Like Stryker, for example, Stryker, I believe, is working on a robotic spine platform, but they also just divested and sold their spine business, right? And
so their implant business, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's a lot of stuff happening like that. And I think even on the acquisition side, for how like messy these acquisitions are, it used to be that like if you're a big company, you just kind of acquire your way into these like new areas and new markets. But that also has been proven to be like very, very difficult and messy. Despite like a lot of its massive potential, one thing I've been excited about in the last few years is the adoption of AI, even in my own business. I mean, I can't tell you how many different tools we use in our business on the agency side for AI. Things like, an SOP used to take me a few hours to make it. It's done in 30 seconds. But despite that, AI adoption in healthcare is kind of lagging behind a lot of other industries. What do you think are the biggest roadblocks, whether it's like regulation or data silos, or maybe something else that's going to be getting in the way of healthcare? And how do we overcome that?
It's an excellent question. And it was actually part of my presentation in Portugal, where I showed the Goldman Sachs data. So it's not surprising things like financial services, things that are kind of, information retrieval, information middleware are rapidly, being changed by generative AI. I think it's been a bit of a laggard because people haven't really thought about it clearly. And I'll give you an example. So in a lot of the areas we work in, which is a form of physical AI, I like to call it somatic AI, it relates to the body. Some people have tried to jump from, let's say, practitioners to autonomous robots, and they've had some challenges, right? Because they have not yet, I think, kind of mastered the data sets. One of the reasons, like we've been waiting for autonomous driving for a long time, right? People like it's just around the corner. It's going to be here in 10 minutes. And that was a decade ago, right? Tesla used to have a lot of announcements, though. If you use Waymo, it's actually getting pretty good, actually. And because you're trying to model the entire world, cars, people, dogs, random events, objects, weather, misleading traffic signs, all kinds of things. So it takes a very large model to do that. I know people have really thought that in physical AI, whether it's surgery or procedures, for example, you actually have a much more constrained data set because the more narrow it is. So, for example, the most common surgical procedure today is cataract surgery. And, there are a lot of cataract robots and increasing amount of autonomy going into it because it's a very well understood procedure. The data sets are very, very large. It happens a lot. There's still doctors doing that, but increasingly autonomy and robotics are playing a role because they have the data set. And I don't think that a lot of people have focused on the data elements. I'm going to be a broken record on this for the pieces in medtech or healthcare that they are focusing on. Now, I think we're seeing this, for example, in patient records. There's companies, whether they're companies like a Bridge, that the minute you go into the doctor's office, it's all being built. It's not just recorded like Nuance. It's actually building a medical record as you walk through it. So the data first companies, I think, are starting to change that. And I think we're in the beginning of an avalanche of innovation that is just starting to hit the market. And then there's also a parsing of what should be done autonomously or by robots or AI models and what should be done by human beings and practitioners. So, and once again, it comes down to it. Our company that I worked on, Caption Health, which we was acquired by GE Healthcare, was an AI tool that basically guided the capture of an EKG using a butterfly handheld ultrasound. And literally, the software was the equivalent of an Uber app, and it had arrows on a tablet or a phone, and it told the person doing it. I'll give you the abject example here. So my wife used to be a cardiac nurse practitioner. There's a lot about the heart. And when I went up to visit the company early on, they were even called Bay Labs back then. There was this poor guy, he'd always have to take his shirt off, and he would be everybody get to do the demo on him. And I did it quicker than my wife because she knows how the heart works and she's used ultrasound devices. I just followed the arrows like an Uber driver. And it knew when it had collected enough data to capture the EKG and the ejection fraction, to calculate that. And that's an example where just through getting the right data set and the right amount of effectively practice and then taking it, you can actually build something that is, very kind of game changing. It allows people who are underskilled compared to traditional sonography to be able to do that. So then the next wave is, okay, you still want cardiologists doing the overread. But then we start working with companies that are doing AI-based models for overreads. And so that's kind of like the next frontier, which is interpretation. And we're seeing a lot of computer vision models emerging in healthcare. We're seeing it for example, people that would have a biopsy and people would study the cells. There would be people squinting at microscopes and images, and now the overread can be done pixel by pixel by a computer vision program, and getting extremely accurate. So it's about if you understand the data strategy, you understand the incremental steps, and you understand how you continuously add more value to that. That's a different way of looking at things than saying, I'm going to build a better, faster, cheaper X than pick your favorite incumbent, doing something in a large multi-billion-dollar market.
You emphasize this concept that TechMed companies really need to be data first businesses. This week was the AAOS conference, which is the big conference for orthopedics, and Globus, which is a robotics company. They had their investor presentations, and one of the analysts sort of asked Globus about data, and their response was that they didn't feel like data was going to be a strong differentiator for any company in the future, mainly because it's going to, a lot of the data is going to be essentially, it's not something that you can technically own. It's something that's going to be available to most companies. So in a world where everyone is like collecting data, what makes a data set truly proprietary and defensible, and how do startups start, leveraging data as a true moat?
Well, there's two forms of data. There's plenty of film and X-rays and other forms of CAT scans, other things that you could pull in and build a model from. And once again, I heard actually about this Globus presentation, though I didn't listen to it, but I will actually, and I do, and I have a lot of respect for the Globus folks. And then there's things that happen in real time. And it's the marriage of those two where I think the competitive advantage is. There are a lot of, our company Proprio works with the harm study group, a lot of pediatric spine work and deformity and degeneration, right? But when you marry it to a patient in real time, and how that data works. So if you were unfortunate enough to need a spine surgery and we set you up to see Dr. Bransford or Dr. Brown up at UW, they would say, okay, they would look at all your films. They would look at your medical records. They would also say, how old are you? What kind of shape is your bones in? What are their underlying conditions you have? And then once they put you on the table and start to operate on you, everything changes. There's all kinds of things you didn't see that were in the film. It could be a growth, it could be a tumor, it could be something that was just hidden or shadowed in the orthopedic structure, or the spinal structure, in your sacrum, which is one of the harder parts of the body to get really good spine to get film on. So a lot of those things could be happening. It's that marriage of those two, right? I'm not going to hand the roadmap to people like Globus, right? But I think it's those two where you have that. And then the truth is that number of companies in a space is irrelevant to winning in my book. You try to look for niches that are very narrow and not very competitive, but you also look for very large markets. I mentioned my company Airspace. We came about in the era when Wi-Fi was really just getting mass produced. In the early 2000s, Intel put the first chip on a laptop. It was called Centrino. They spent $1 billion marketing it. And everybody said, oh, I've got a Wi-Fi chip on my laptop. I want to connect it to an access point. There were 15 other wireless LAN companies, startups. They're the three largest companies were Cisco, Symbol, and Proxim. Proxim had no product. They kind of got wiped out early. And only two companies returned and then made capital in building that out. One was us, Airspace, and the other was a company called Aruba, which we competed with, eventually went public. Excellent company. And they're now part of HP. What happened to the other 13 startups? They all had the same advantages. They were equally well funded. They had smart teams. So I don't buy that kind of argument. Just because it's available, you can win. What happened to all the chip vendors that competed with Intel? I think it's an attitude that I have a networking background, right? And there's the OSI stack at the top of that ends at 7, which is the presentation layer. Then we used to joke there's layer 8, and those are sales and marketing people. And, when I was at Cisco, we had 15,000 salespeople hitting the ground every day. And they think about account ownership and earnouts and all the things that go on in this industry. That's usually when you're vulnerable. If you think that your sales people's relationship and accounts are going to be the key competitive advantage, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but that's my experience, then you're definitely open for disruption because there are people that demand more, right? And, we work with some of the best neurosurgeons in the world at Proprio. Many of them have relationships with the large vendors in spine, but they're still working with us because there's something like, I just don't buy the argument because it's available, you're going to do it well. The dustbin of history is littered with incumbents who have missed transitions. Sometimes if they're very well off, they can buy. If the data is commodity, in commodity markets, cost structure wins. But I don't think most of the healthcare market that is turning the AR commodity markets yet.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to be polite. I have actually much more aggressive thoughts that I'm keeping to myself. Right?
Alan,
can figure this out, right?
Yes, but for the pure entertainment of my audience, I have been, and I've very graciously been told that people see the show as the Joe Rogan show of medtech. And so by all means, I can tell you there's numerous episodes where I go on very aggressive and sometimes vulgar rants about how outdated sales and marketing is. So by all means, don't hold back at all.
Well, look, I'm very respectful of these companies. Like they work really hard. They're really talented people. But
But
I've
but is
done
it?
4 startups in a row, and I've invested in 9. And the law of them is that almost all of them should be dead. Why are
Yeah,
they
I agree.
winning?
And look. Let me ease you with it. Let me open it up. I'll go first to the buffet line. Um, a lot of these companies that are the large ones, they say we're very innovative, etc. But if you look at the actions, they don't map back to the words that they're using. And let's just use something as simple as sales. The sales teams are still operating like it's like 2000, in terms of the strategies they use, the way they approach the customer. Same thing on the marketing side. To this day, I had a call today where there's every Friday I do a Zoom call with a bunch of marketers, and I had to have this rant because I received a message from a VP of marketing saying, "Oh, I don't do downstream marketing. I'm only focused on upstream."
Can you tell
That
me what
doesn't.
that means? I see that title downstream because that's what language is that? That doesn't appear to be English. What does downstream marketing mean?
Thank you. Let me tell you what downstream in our industry. Downstream marketing means that you're dealing closer with, let's say, the market. So you're dealing with promotion, pricing, messaging, etc. And upstream is more strategic, where you think about the product and voice of customer, etc. And to me, that's complete nonsense. It's all the same thing. It doesn't
Well, I
make.
mean, people should take a lesson from the packaged goods industries, where if you're a brand manager at Unilever or at Procter and Gamble, you do both.
You own it all, right? And that's my thing is like, okay, I have no problem with product management and upstream marketing. But if you have done all of this research and you've spoken to prospects, the market, the customer, everything, guess what? You're the subject matter expert to this. You don't take all of this and hand it over to downstream and say,
Well,
hey, good luck.
yeah, I think there's a lot of assumptions. Look, there are people over time who've said, "Hey, we want," one of the things, we've seen companies in the past that say, "Look, we're going to get the product expert, or the what do they call it? The sales reps that like go into procedures." It says the doctors don't want them in the operating room. We saw a couple of deals 5 years ago that were like that. We're going to remove that. We're going to use cameras and all of these things. It turns out that the device reps are actually the expert in the devices, and the surgeons and the doctors actually like having them in the room because they've seen thousands of this, and they're actually value added. Like they're not a device rep the way somebody selling clothing samples is a rep, right? They are, they're technical, they're smart, they understand operative procedures and all of these things. So yeah, I think that's the creeping bureaucratization that we see in large companies where you make people's roles smaller and smaller, and it's about a kind of like almost like an assembly line. I do this little piece, I hand it off, you do your little piece, you hand it off, you do it, your piece. And, it's not a fault, but it is, you have to stay close to the market and you have to stay close to the product and you have to really understand what's going on, and honestly, it's what Andy Grove said, you need to be really paranoid if you're in any technology business. And, it just like, it's really hard sometimes when you own 51% of a market.
Mm-hmm.
And the hardest job you have is changing the paper and the fax machine for the orders coming in. Right? People don't do that, but that was the joke in the '90s. And so this is for me. Even though there's so much technology applied in the medtech industry, it doesn't feel like a tech industry yet. To a large extent, it doesn't have that kind of ruthless speed of execution and competition. It doesn't yet have the paranoia. It doesn't have the reinvention, blow yourself up. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I remember reading in 1995 the memo that Gates sent everyone in Microsoft or leadership, I can't remember, after the launch of the Netscape browser. And he wrote about, I think in his book, The Road Ahead. He realized that Microsoft, if did not reposition, and it was just going to sell you packaged software to run on your laptop, it was going to have some serious long-term challenges. And it took a while, but the entire company is retooled around the cloud. And now doing another, and Satya is a fantastic leader, now retooling around AI. So they're self-blowing up their business model. And some of the things they did, and I saw this 10 years ago in my last company, they changed the compensation plans of the teams. So Windows has a server product called Windows Server. It's a multi-billion-dollar product. If you're building an app or running an app on their server, server in your own data center. And 10 years ago, and I don't know where it is now, I remember meeting the team there. It was like 8 years ago, and it was a $3 billion business. And I said, well, how are you guys compensated? He goes, by moving workloads into Azure. So there are things that large companies can do, which is how do you gain the attention of the people working for you? How do you set direction saying you used to be compensated for doing X, but if doing X solely is going to have some long-term implications that are negative to the success of this organization going forward, change how people get paid. Tell them what really matters. Just be honest with yourself. Look, it's hard. Most people don't make changes. I always like to say this is that, when do people make changes in their health? Not because of what they read or any of that. Have a heart attack sometime. Have a doctor give you a bad diagnosis, right? Usually people have to have a near-death experience or a life-changing experience before they make a significant change. And companies are not really that much different, particularly if they're publicly traded and very successful. But then you also have to be honest with your shareholders.
Right. No, I completely agree with you. And you know what? I think the analogy is fitting because when it comes to your health, I mean, I'll use somebody in my family. My father had quadruple bypass surgery. And that wasn't enough for him to change his behavior. It was a year after that he needed stents, and that scared him to death, and immediately changed his behavior, started getting in better shape, working out, etc. He's doing great now. Amazing health. I think it's the same thing in our industry where because of the high barrier to entry, there hasn't been enough fear of the future. I personally believe that, as the saying goes, the fish stinks from the head, that this trickles down from leadership, because if you look down to, let's say, the most junior people, usually like in most organizations, it's like you can learn a lot of a company by the behavior of salespeople. We look at the behavior of the average salesperson in medtech. ChatGPT and these AI tools have been around for a long time. Are any of them on average using these tools to, let's say, prospect and, take a lot of information about the prospect they're about to talk to and get a talk track? No, they're not.
Maybe the younger reps are.
Even, believe it or not, the younger reps are not, because I talk to them.
Look, I'm tough on incumbents, but I'm an optimist. Ultimately,
not enough fear of the future. They need to read Grove's book, Only the Paranoid Survive.
Look, I came from a very modest background, and so we didn't come from anything. So my brother and I were the first people in our entire family ever to go to college. And, but one of the things that always stuck in my mind, I read David Halberstam, who just died, wrote a book about the U.S. car industry in the 1970s. It's called The Reckoning. And when the Toyotas, Datsun, now called Nissan, and Hondas rolled off the docks, the folks in Detroit laughed at them. They said, little death traps. But the oil crisis hits. Those cars are getting 30 miles per gallon. The Michigan Metal is getting 11 to 12 miles per gallon. People start shifting behavior. If you were an auto worker on the line in Detroit and you saw that happening and you knew it was going on, you should have gone to night school and found a different job. It's very hard to take responsibility. It's hard for companies to take responsibility to technological change. But there is a lot of technological change. It is coming into the healthcare industry. It's not going to happen in a year or two. But if you think about 5, 10, 15 years, things that are going to happen during our working lifetime, there's going to be huge changes. And, we see people, I had to check, my GP retired. Went to a new GP up at Stanford, and great doctor. And he used an app to record our session. And then he showed me the electronic medical record it built. And it was stunning. Patients this age, this condition, this is what he says about it, this is what we like, perfectly formatted, slipped right into Epic, right? And it was like, he gets it. And guess what? He's not spending, 7 to 10 p.m. every night after he ate with his kids, banging out taking his notes into medical records. So I think frequently innovation comes from the edge, it doesn't come from the core out. That's been my experience in the technology industry. So I'm sure there's plenty of pockets of innovation, including in large companies in this industry, but clearly in the customer base as well. I mean, at Stanford, we have an app called My Health, which is a unified view of all of your healthcare and all of your doctors and all of your medications and all of your tests. And it's visible to everybody, and it just provides better care, and everyone can communicate inside the system. And it runs on top of Epic. I mean, I actually laugh when everyone says Epic's going away. And it's like, I don't know. I think Epic is a proprietary data set. And as long as they allow edge innovation, I'm sure they'll work on stuff on their own. It's like, So sometimes having a competitive moat is, is like, I mean, Oracle hasn't gone away. I mean, so some of the incumbents do extremely well. They're really smart and they allow innovation to happen with them and they partner with it, and others don't. And so I don't want to, throw the baby with the bathwater here. That there are a lot of really good companies in the space, really smart, but there's a world now that's much more collaborative, innovative, and partner oriented as opposed to doing it all yourself.
Everybody, quick break. If you're a medtech CEO or a product leader, you're going to want to listen to this. Now, I want you to imagine you're about to have a product launch. You've poured your time, your budget, your reputation into a device you're about to launch. And after all of that effort, your FDA submission, poof, gets rejected because of cybersecurity. This sounds dramatic, but it's actually not. It happens all the time to medtech companies, especially recently with everything being digitized. This happens so often because medtech companies treat cybersecurity as a checkbox when it's now a non-negotiable design pillar. The FDA's 2023 guidance didn't suggest cybersecurity, it demanded it. So if you're not ready with threat modeling, penetration testing, SBOM management, incident response, and airtight documentation, you're not launching, period. And here's what most entrepreneurs don't realize. Scrambling to fix these issues last minute can cost over $250,000 and delay your launch by months, which imagine the investment of getting delayed, right? The more you spend time in review limbo with the FDA is lost revenue, lost market share, and lost investor confidence. And yet, so many founders and entrepreneurs I talk to, they still treat cybersecurity as a postscript instead of a strategic advantage. Now, I've held off bringing this to my audience as a topic until now because there just wasn't a medtech-focused cybersecurity firm that I trusted, and that changed when I found Blue Goat Cyber. They specialize exclusively in medtech cybersecurity. They've helped companies like bioMaru, Inogen, Natera, along with nimble startups to get to market faster with a 100% FDA success rate. I had the chance to meet the founder, Christian Espinosa, and his story really resonated with me. So after he sold his first cybersecurity company, Alpine Security, Christian actually faced a personal health crisis. He ended up in the hospital, and that moment made him realize how vital and vulnerable medical devices really are because a medical device saved his life. So he built Blue Goat to serve medtech CEOs and founders just like you. Whether you're pre-revenue or scaling fast, Blue Goat can offer fixed-free pricing, unlimited retests, and no surprises. This isn't bolt-on security. This is built in from day one. You wouldn't launch a device that hasn't been clinically validated, so why would you risk launching one that's vulnerable to attack? Blue Goat will secure your device, simplify your submission, accelerate your approval, and they'll do it in a way that fits your budget, your timeline, and your team. So here's what I want you to do next. Go to bluegoatcyber.com, schedule a discovery call. They do these amazing calls. They'll do an analysis with you, educate you more, because the cost of waiting could be everything that you've worked for. So that being said, go to bluegoatcyber.com and schedule that call now. Let's get back to the episode.
Actually, just looking back on my bookshelf, there's a great book Steve Case wrote about the third wave, and I think that we're really entering that third wave now where, in terms of the third wave of technology, that you have to get farther together. So there's going to be much more emphasis on partnership and collaboration. It's just because the world we live in is a lot more complicated than it was even 10 years ago.
No, that's right. I mean, think about the biggest pandemic we've had in our lifetime, right? Where none of us have been around for the Spanish flu or polio, right? In the 50s, was the COVID. And COVID, it took them days to sequence the virus. And the speed of delivering the main immunizations, one was from Moderna and one was from Pfizer. Well, Moderna is an RNA company, right? They're a giant tech bio company but themselves. And Pfizer partnered with BioN out of Germany, right? So you had two, I think it's a husband and wife, I don't remember, they came from Turkey to Germany. They started BioN. They came in out. Pfizer took it to market. Lilly took Abcellera to market. Moderna was more like a combo of the two of them, large company, but also, an RNA, a technology oriented doing that. So we're seeing these collaborations all over the place. In fact, I think the biotech industries and pharmaceutical industry is really a good model for the medtech industry. We have a company, Relation Therapeutics, very smart sequencing company in the therapeutic space, right? They just received a large amount of cash from GSK, and then something called BioBucks, $3 billion, up to commitment to buy up to $3 billion of product if they deliver. Why don't people in medtech do that? Saying, if you deliver what we need and you take it to market through us, we'll give you a contract for $1 billion. You might see a whole lot of it's like, it's interesting that just across the aisle, right? I mean, you're either dealing with people's blood and their DNA, or you're fixing their organs and their bones, right? I mean, they're just different. It's funny. Sun and Cisco were founded in labs that were across the hall from each other at Stanford.
I did not know that.
Oh yeah, Stanley and Len. They had to hook up all the printers. They invented Cisco, right? Internet grew, right? Story for another day. And then, Scott and Vinod, the other, like they came out of the other side of the lab. In fact, there was a guy who, a very early employee at Cisco, who decided to go with Sun and then came back. He was the first 50 employees at Cisco. He actually worked at both places. And so it's that environment and that collaboration. So it's not a surprise to me, by the way, that the two of the biggest centers for biotech innovation, one has been South San Francisco and the other is around Boston. Route 128 and Silicon Valley were big drivers for the tech revolution, completely showed up in biotechnology, whether it's Biogen or Genentech, right? I mean, and, large academic environment, capital like ours, risk capital willing to go into this innovation model, and also an acceptance of failure, meaning, there's no stigma for failing if, sometimes things don't work. So, that's why I'm investing. I mean, that's why I like TechMed. It's like, this is all virgin territory. There hasn't been, and so it's like, this is a great place to be in. Med tech, I'm not an investor in. And I live in a neighborhood, several of my neighbors are very successful, multiple time entrepreneurs, built medical devices, drop my AirPod, but they'll take 50, $80 million and they'll turn it into $200-300 million and they'll do it 5 times and they'll call it a career. Those are not exciting terms for the VC community. We have different expectations on capital and the model we work on. So we're willing to make big bets. I mean, you hope that you work really hard to make sure most of them, or some large enough of them, work to multiply the fund. That's how we stay in business. 1x, our investors get their money X. 2x, we start to share in the returns. 3x, 1x, you manage to be friendly with your investors. 2x, and 3x is when you keep your job and they come back and invest with you multiple times. We're, on our 7th fund. So it's a different perspective. And so I think venture capital in this whole space is extremely healthy. It'll be the same kind of ecosystem. There'll be some companies that won't make it. There'll be companies that will get acquired, and then there'll be companies that will get to break out. Whether it follows the same patterns of the traditional tech industry, I don't know yet, but we'll see.
On your comment about the expectations of what venture has, unfortunately, what we've seen in the last few years is that venture as an asset class really sort of underperformed. A lot of VCs are struggling to raise LP money. Why do you think that happened, and what do you think venture has to do to kind of sort of have its own sort of evolution?
Well, I mean, it's not really that complicated. We had a very hyped up cycle into about 2021. And there has been very few exits in general, right? If you look at IPO pipelines, and it was flying up to 21, and then it fell off. So we're now entering the 3rd year where IPOs and M&A are really repressed. That, at the end of the day, it's not really complicated. If I don't make money from my investors, they fire me. Not that they're not lovely people and we all don't get along, but they have expectations, right? It's their capital. It's their capital and our capital that goes into these investments. I think we're hopeful. We will see, right, that this could be a good year for activity, but very few companies got out last year. I will also say there are different types of investors. We are a deep tech investor. Right, rockets, robots, microbes, TechMed, tech bio, water, robots, automation. We don't build SaaS companies that flip in 3 or 4 years. I mean, I always used to joke that being a VC is the only job where you basically work by yourself and you don't get a report card for 7 to 10 years. But our LPs and our investors who work with us understand our model, and they've seen multiple times in our past. It's just kind of.
Do you think Do you think part of the reason for that is that? Oh, sorry. Finish your thought.
Well, I mean, I think that there's a lot of practitioners in it too, right? We went from hundreds to thousands and thousands, and every time there's a cycle, every time there's a cycle, what happens is that when an industry like blows up, and venture is not unlike the tech industry. So in the early computing ages in the 60s, there were mainframes, and then along comes Microsoft and Intel and Apple and all of the client server companies, and hundreds of companies get formed, of which a dozen or two survive. Then we had the cloud wave. This time there were thousands, and then maybe now there's 100 companies that are long-term survivors. So every time there's one of these cycles, there's a giant amount of people that come in, and then it kind of consolidates to a smaller number of winners. And so the same thing is true in venture. There's just a lot of solo practitioners. There's an enormous, the amount of capital in venture, really plateaued in 2021. And as we like to say, is that, there are more good deals than we have capital for, but then there's a lot more deals that we would never do. And so, it takes a lot of work to parse these things. And even then, there's still execution risk and all these things that go on. So, look, we need markets. The state of venture capital is directly tied to the stock market. But I don't, there are things that I think I'm trained as an economist. People said interest rates. On a historical basis, interest rates are pretty low. You get a mortgage for 6%. I moved here to Silicon Valley in 1998. I think my interest rates were about 7-8%. When I bought my house when we came out here, nobody said, "Oh my God, these are so high," because we had double-digit interest rates in the 70s, 15, 16%. So there are some, the great companies in the 70s, Cisco, Intel, Microsoft, Apple, Sun, Oracle, all these companies, they were built in an era of stagflation. They got started in the late 70s. That was a pretty brutal time for the economy. So there's something else also, I think, where I just don't personally understand, because it's not the cost of money that is causing this. But I think there's a lot of reason to believe that there's a lot of pent up demand. There are a lot of companies waiting to go public. It just needs kind of a stable stock market. Last couple of weeks, stock market's been a little bit volatile.
Yeah, definitely, and we'll see how the year goes, because given the political environment, tariffs, all these things they're changing. We'll see what happens. Again, I'm very hopeful. The one thing I love about being American is we do some wild stuff, and we don't care about tradition. We're willing to torch things down if it means that we can come up with something better. So we'll end up seeing what happens. Just as a small pivot, at the time that we record this, it's Friday, March 14th, and this is the day that LSI announced a great partnership with the State of Medtech. We're very excited for. So do you mind? I have a data backed by LSI question for you that I came up with. You okay doing that?
I'll do my best. I can't make any promises. Keep your expectations low and you'll be perfectly fine.
Okay, perfect. And for those who are listening again, LSI, if you want to learn more about them, go to lifesciencemarketresearch.com. And specifically, this is going to be coming from their platform, so you can say goodbye to overpriced market reports forever. Industry experts from Medtronic to McKinsey trust LSI to help them make smarter decisions and grow their business faster. You can go to lifesciencemarketresearch.com/platform. This is the platform that I'm currently using to come up with this question. So one of the reports that I found in LSI that I found very interesting was their wearable devices. So the wearable devices segment of the global medical devices market totaled about $18.5 billion in 2022. And the forecast is to be the second most rapidly growing segment of the market, with a 14.2% CAGR over the 2022 to 2027 interval. My question to you is that when you look at all those wearables, one of the reasons why I believe it's such a big number is because you have so many different specialties in there. What part of medicine, and what I mean by part, I mean orthopedics, cardiovascular, neuro, what part do you feel like in the next 5 to 10 years is going to have the most impact as a result of wearable technology, and why?
Can I also add implantable technology to wearable?
Ooh. Okay, you can apply, yes, you can add that, but I will say if you added implantable technology, that might increase the CAGR of this report. But yes, let's add that. Yeah, but you have to come up with one non-implantable technology.
Oh yeah. Well, look, I'll give you, just to start this, and I know we're gonna probably run out of time a little bit, is that this morning I got up and I don't have any hearing issues, but I set myself up with my AirPods too, and I said, could I use it? They've been advertising, can use it as a hearing aid. And I recommend anybody who's got a pair of AirPods Pro, they should do this. It takes you through an audio test. It actually tells me how good my hearing is. Fortunately, everything's good. And then begins the path of setting that up as a hearing aid. And if you think about the state of our population, aging in the population, hearing is a real issue. And for various reasons, expense, not knowing a lot about it. Some of the technology is great because it just magnifies, not great, just magnifies it. Not good for every useful. So here's a technology that was invented to listening music or taking phone calls. This is a perfect TechMed story and is now becoming a hearing aid for a rapidly aging population that you can set up on your own. And so if you ask me why is it growing, I have an Apple Watch, which, I use for lots of things, including keeping time, but also a whole bunch of apps. I have a really good friend. He's older. And about 4 months ago, he woke up one morning and his watch told him he was an AFib. He called his doctor and sent him over to the cardiologist. They shocked him that afternoon. He was on his bike. The reason why I think the market, whether it is for smartwatches, for increasing peripherals around, this to me, this is not a phone. This is the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? You can go anywhere in the world, do whatever you want, pay for it, organize it, and navigate with this device. It is providing a level of processing power and capabilities and access to data to allow you to deal with health situations and monitor it on a regular basis. It knows how many steps you took. It knew when you were sleeping. So I am a big fan of, call it bracelet or watch technology, but I'm also seeing that there is an emerging class of technology that can be implanted that, closer to your bloodstream, that it can monitor a whole bunch of other things, including glucose, blood gases that are going to start to take off. Because if there's one thing we all know about your healthcare, point in time information is not nearly as valuable as continuous information.
Completely agree.
Right. So, I laugh. You go for an annual checkup and your doctor listens to your heart and he checks your blood pressure. And it's like, did I get a good night's sleep? Did I drink a lot of water before that? Did I just come from 2-week eating binge, on a road trip for work? There are a whole bunch of things. So I think what we're learning is being able to continuously monitor trends. Right. And I call these data rivers instead of data lakes or data houses, right? Is that you want data to constantly be refreshed, just like as a river streams through, our topography, and to refresh that data and then to personalize it specifically to the patterns of behavior of that. So there are people wearing Oura rings, all kinds of these things. And we're still pretty early, right, in a lot of these wearables. So that to me, these are tech devices, one was set up to be both the watch and the AirPods are extensions of your iPhone. Like that thing, your iPhone's doing the processing, but these are collection points, just like an Apple Watch or Fitbit or an Oura Ring, whatever, what have you. So I would say major collection things like watches and bands are going to continue to grow. And there were earlier generations, but the capability, once you tied the Apple Watch to the power of an iPhone, which, iPhone has more power than the computers that landed the lunar module, which you're walking around with in your pocket. So I'm not surprised at all by that forecast. I think it could be small. I think it could be a lot bigger.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, I love that you put it that way, because I think one of the things that I'm most excited about for med tech, and I think this is the blend of med tech and TechMed, is where you combine essentially like, hardware that helps with capturing data in a new way, maybe in an automatic way, and software that scales. I think like one example of like a traditional med device that has this TechMed approach is a company called Acuren, where they essentially automate. It's for acute kidney injury. The main vital sign you need to get is urine output, which is usually checked randomly. And, and a lot of people, 300,000 people, I think, die a year in the US from AKI. It's like prostate cancer, breast, and colon all combined. But like nobody knows of it. And this company, what they did is they automated urine output. And then they have a data team essentially taking that automatic urine output that's coming out every 5 to 10 minutes and developing algorithms to help people essentially predict and intervene earlier. I think like 10 years ago, Alan, I would have never have guessed like people who are non-diabetic are going to pay cash and buy continuous glucose monitors for themselves for fun. I was one of those people. I think whoever the first company that comes out with not a continuous blood monitor where I plug it in, and instead of me getting labs on a daily or weekly basis, I can get cholesterol, testosterone levels. I'll be the first one to buy that.
I know 5 companies that are doing it right now in stealth, all talking to the FDA.
I'll be the first one to buy it. I want to be mindful of your time. Do you have time for perhaps one more question?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, you're the best, Alan. I knew before, right when we got connected through Scott, I was like, I know we're going to get along really well. So I have one question for you, and then we're going to wrap up with just a couple of rapid fire questions, like 2 or 3
okay.
fun ones. Okay. So the last one that I have for you is that, in one of your interviews that I really enjoyed this, you mentioned that, TechMed needs its own intuitive surgical, meaning that you needed like a breakout company that forces the industry to change. So intuitive, again, like a 2-product company, maybe probably just one, and they have the largest market cap in the industry, like I think 40 or $50 billion on Medtronic. So what technology or startups do you think have the best chance of that being that defining force for change? Feel free to talk about a category. If you have a portfolio company you want to shout out, feel free to do that.
Well, if you ask an investor that question, I think our company Proprio, our surgical guidance company, absolutely has that opportunity because of what it's going to do for patients and the ability to really transform a surgery through data is going to do that. The reason why you need an intuitive for TechMed or any category is to prove that you can build an alpha in the ecosystem and that it can be, could be ridiculously valuable, which obviously then attracts a lot of investment, right? Because some of these companies are going to need hundreds of millions of dollars or more. Not necessarily, OpenAI has already eaten $11 billion of capital, right? And will take a whole lot more to build that. So it's not going to need those kinds of levels of funds, but to build something that's really transformative is, usually get it on $15 or $20 million. So it takes a bit more. But what I would say is that company is going to come from a category where you're going to really have that speciation event in a way a certain medical practice has occurred. And in the case of Proprio, and we'll talk about others, that the ability to give surgeon real-time feedback about how they're doing and to guide what they're doing in a way that's dramatically more accurate, more efficient, more effective, and produce patient outcomes. Last year, we had our first 50 patients that came through had successful surgeries, and that means they had to go back for rework, didn't have severe pain afterwards, right? Those type of companies will capture the attention of the practitioners who are the surgeons, right? And in the medical field, it's a little different, let's say, than we were talking about, let's say, an Apple Watch and something which you're kind of self-monitoring or you're working with. It's like literally the people who deliver medicine have to get a lot of benefit and their patients have to get a lot of benefit out of that. And so, other characteristics are there's a huge backlog. There's a dramatic, not enough amount of practitioners. The reason that I, invested in Proprio, aside from, great team, great technology, is that we have a huge aging population. We also have a population that grew up in front of phones and screens. A lot of them are going to have sitting in a chair for your whole life, you're going to have back problems and you're going to have spine problems. And you just lousy posture, lousy health habits. Work is going to cause that. And it takes 25 years to build a really good spine surgeon. And there aren't enough of them. So, there is today about a 30,000 surgeon gap in the US. That must mean there'd be somewhere between 300,000 and 3 million surgeons around the rest of the world. You're not going to solve those issues by doing things the same way. So the ability to extend the capability or provide more patient coverage through surgeons is one of the key benefits of a Proprio, about the amount of time it saves during procedures and the effectiveness of what it does. And you'll see generationally, people will kind of grow up in systems like that and they'll demand that and they'll start in different ways. It can be something very, obviously very complex, technology like that will change how an entire industry does things. The greatest invention in surgery ever was probably the X-ray. It allowed somebody to know what they had to do before they went into surgery. There are lots of other inventions and, CAT scans and PET scans, but, imagery inside the body is super important. And then obviously labs, there's all kinds of things that go around that. It's not a single, invention, but what it did is it informationalized to the surgeon what they had to do. and where where the risks are, where the challenges were, where the hot spots are, built the triage plan in their mind before they went in to do a surgery. So to me, something that creates a step change is going to do that. I mean, obviously, what Intuitive did, and by Alan Levy, who is the just left the Intuitive board. He's on the board of Proprio. He was the first outside, and he was the lead director till recently. It was on the whole ride with them, right? It was the reason we were happy to have him along on that. And you also have to have a very big ambition and tolerance for risk to build a company like that. But if it can be done, that unlocks generations of entrepreneurs that want to do great things, right? I mean, I think there are people that are wired, if you just want to go to a job that anyone else can do, you go to your job. But a lot of people who are inventors and entrepreneurs, they want to do something really meaningful, and they want to pick areas where they can do something that was meaningful. And if you were spending $50 million to build a surgical device that you sold for $120 million, there's nothing wrong with that accomplishment. Probably paid for somebody's houses, paid some kids' college tuition, delivered value to the world, but it's not going to get the most ambitious people. You're saying, I'm wearing today one of our other portfolio, Rocket Lab. You're in the Southern California. Rocket Lab is the second leading launch vehicle to SpaceX. They focus mostly on small satellites. I think they had another one, say they've had 63 or 64 consecutive launches. They launched 20-something rockets last year. They're going to do a lot more this year. It takes a really ambitious person to build a rocket company from scratch that's successful. Only two of them have been successful so far: SpaceX and Rocket Lab in the U.S. Founders from New Zealand, didn't go to college, self-taught engineer. The successful lander there were two landers that hit the moon. One's on its side. The one they provided all the back-end software for the management of that. Right. And I guess he was knighted by the Queen, so he's now Sir Peter Beck, the CEO. That kind of ambition gets really special people. And so you need an Intuitive because you can need to signal to people that they should put their time into this field, that they should focus on human health outcomes, that they can build something amazing and long-standing. That's just not an appetizer for a large company. They want to control their oin fate. You get to build a company, you get to run it for 30 years. That's a pretty good life, right? That's a whole different way of thinking than just going to work every day. There are all kinds of people. It's not value judgment. And I think our industry and healthcare and medtech needs that kind of ability to satisfy that kind of ambition to allow people to do great things. So that's why you need, Intuitives. And I think we're going to see it in a lot of, I think obviously we've talked about surgery. I think we're going to see this in the creation of whole classes of cancer drugs that are much more targeted to specific cancers and using people's own immune system. So I think we're just in the beginning phases of that, and that's also going to bring a lot more capital into the industry from an investment thing, which is a good thing, which will ultimately benefit patients and practitioners alike.
Well, I'll be I'm sure one of many people to say, like, I'm very grateful for an investor like you, because knowing your background, you could have gone into a lot of different areas. You've decided to spend time and invest in this industry, and I think doing that is going to essentially be a forcing function for investors to do things differently. Same with companies. And again, I completely agree with you, which is, at the end of the day, like, yes, we want to say, it's not enough just to say that the mission of like medtech is to like improve and save lives. Like, people have to know that if you come and spend an enormous amount of time and risk and everything, that you're going to make a lot of money at the end of the day. And I think that, that's going to attract the most ambitious people. And, I know like Elon has Neuralink, but like our industry kind of needs its own Elon, to sort of like motivate.
No, look, I think that's right. I think that's really, it's, and it's like,
we have a marketing problem.
Yeah, it's a problem where just, things just take time, right? I mean, the computing industry was dominated by one company called IBM for 3 or 4 decades. And if it wasn't for competition, they wouldn't have built a PC, right? Right. It's ecosystems need alphas, because alphas create organizational structures in the ecosystem, and so does competition for resources. It's the hell. On some level, that's how capitalism works, right? It is, that the best and brightest have a chance to succeed. And, for me, I've been a venture VC for 6 years, but I was a startup guy for 15 years. To me, the greatest satisfaction I've taken from that former experience, which I really think was the form, like when I did my best work. My partner's hoping I'm still doing my best work, right? If they're watching, is that, yeah, we built some stuff and we made some money, but we also, the people who work with us, they bought houses, they sent their kids to school, they paid for weddings, right? We allowed people to, satisfy their own dreams by taking the risk of working with us. I mean, to me, it's like, I don't really, I don't care about billions and that stuff. And we delivered a lot of good. And we allowed people to use technology, in many cases that would improve their life and improve their productivity. It's like, that's to me not, and I'm only feeling this later. It didn't start this way, and when I see, a Dr. Broud or Dr. Bransford, up at UW having successful surgery using Proprio and getting it done and feeling good, like that was somebody's family member, that was somebody's kid that was on that table. Right. And it's like, I mean, I have such huge respect for people in this industry, for doctors and nurses, even for administrators, everybody in this, because, they didn't get into this industry to get rich. I mean, yes, they want to make a good living. They want to be paid well for what they do, like anybody in any industry, but they really care. Almost all of them really care about the outcomes of their patients. And that's why they do that. And why should they not be equipped with the best to do their job? And a competitive ecosystem will help promote that.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like constraints and competition will always make things better. I mean, if you look at Elon, I mean, the guy has unlimited money, maybe not unlimited, but even as close to as he can get. He can recruit anybody he wants in the world, but yet he uses competition and more specifically constraints, like artificial constraints, to get things done. I mean, when he goes and builds certain companies or data centers, like he creates artificial time constraints just to get stuff done. So I'm hoping that more of that gets introduced into the industry, and then we see just an elevation in terms of our technology, our business models, and more. Alan, I really want to thank you for spending so much time with us. I can't wait to meet you in person next week at LSI, one of my favorite industry events. Before we let you go, a couple of fun rapid fire questions. Is that okay? All right. So knowing that you're friends with Jeffrey Moore, you have a literature background, and I can see that you're a reader just like me, I'm wondering, what's a book that you gift most often to other people? This doesn't have to be a business book or tech book, but a book that you feel like you recommend and gift more often than not.
Oh, wow, that's a really hard question.
I know.
I think,
I personally don't ever want to get asked that question.
yeah, it depends by era, right? I don't think there's been one book continuously. There's a couple of books that mean a lot, to me. There is a book by author named Richard Russo called Nobody's Fool. It's a novel, and it is about basically a laborer in upstate New York, and who's kind of pretty scattered life. And in the 60th year of his life, he kind of puts it together in a really special way. So I tend to look, when I want to give something to things, I want books that give people, aside from entertaining them and, great characters and great language, that give them the ability to see a bigger opportunity for themselves. I mean, if you have the patience, like my favorite book all time is James Joyce's Ulysses, which is a 700-page book that takes place in the life of one day in Dublin, Ireland. And it gives you an amazing snapshot of a country in a period of time. Literally, it takes place in a day. If you're looking for heroic literature, I mean, you could do worse than Lord of the Rings. I love the movies, and they've ruined it a little bit too, because, you think about those folks, not necessarily the folks in the book. I mean, there are different eras. I mean, I think, for me, when you do that, but they tend to be novels. The things that I think it's.
What about if there's one book you is a must read for, let's say, entrepreneurs and even like some of the leaders the CEOs of your portfolio companies?
Oh, no brainer. Ben Horowitz's The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
It's such a good book.
Ben was my board member at Nicira, and he was one of the best. He's the best board member I had as a startup guy. It cuts through everything.
It's so good because, I think there's a class of business books like The Hard Things About I would put these together. I wonder if you'd agree with this. The Hard Thing About Hard Things, and then Grove's Only the Paranoid Survive. I feel like those are companions to each other.
Well, yeah, look, Grove was a big inspiration for Ben and a mentor, so it's not a surprise.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, Ben used to spend time with Andy. I mean, I think if and then I'll give you another book that just and we'll close on. I mean, I love history books and I read a lot of them, but Doris Kearns Goodwin's book about Lincoln, Team of Rivals, is
Yes.
absolutely my favorite history book because Lincoln's ability, you always give management advice like hire people better than you. It's kind of what he did. They all looked down on him initially. They were his rivals for the nomination for the Republican Party in, the 1860s. And, he managed to save our country and get the best out of people. And he did it with humility, and he did it through this incredible human empathetic intellect that he had in probably the most intractable problem in American history that was not an external war, right? That could have ripped us into two different countries. And, so I think it's always worth, I always go to Lincoln. We're in a period of kind of political acrimony around the board. But Lincoln recognized that being a nation of collective benefit and collective good was worth fighting for. And, it was terrible, right? Brutal war. And I think every American should read that book. Actually, anybody anywhere should read that book because saving the nation created, arguably the greatest country in world history. We'll find out we're still a young country and we're only a couple hundred years old. And his compassion as a human being. And then the last one for kind of how the world works. I love Tom Friedman's The World is Flat and The Lexus and the Olive Tree. I've worked with Tom over the years because it is it's not a technical book. And it is a much more popular way to understand the changes that are going on around us because of technology and what its impact is, for the globe. It's, I think he's working on a book now. I haven't seen it in a while, but, he said something in one of his columns about a year or two ago. He goes, because of social media and the internet, we can hear each other whispering. Everything is amplified. And that's what he does better than anyone else. He's able to use a very simple metaphor to help you get your mind wrapped around complex subjects. And we as a society, our world is getting more complex. It's not getting simpler. And then finally, a book that I would give people now, because everybody should spend more time out in the world. They should read The Sanctity of Wide Open Spaces. People, we live in a country that all the noise is in the edges, on the coasts, but the giant center of the United States are just spectacular geography. We as human beings have always, lived in much more natural circumstances, except for the last couple of hundred years. Yes, we've had cities for thousands of years, and we're losing that connection. I think it's extremely healthy for people to find those connections when they can.
Is it the sanctity or solace?
I'm sorry, the solace. Yes, you're right.
Okay. I'm at, I always tell people,
caught me, yeah.
Yeah, when people make good recommendations, don't just say, "Oh yeah, cool." Like actually buy the book. So I'm like loading up my Amazon card right now. No, this has been fantastic, Alan. I want to thank you. And just a random one while we're just kind of wrapping up. So I know we did rapid fire. We're going to end it quickly, but one of my favorite history books, like I always think of like, what's the book has like the most value per word? And there's one book on history that was so good and it's short, and that's the great. I'm going to mess it up. It is The Great Lessons of History, I believe, by Will Durant. Yeah, that's
Will Durant, the guy who wrote the 6 volumes of the Roman Empire?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I believe so. But yeah, short book, but like the lessons for like in terms of value per word, short book, but it's so good. Those other ones are fantastic. I really want to thank you so much for recommending them. And for those who are interested in learning more about Alan, go check him out on LinkedIn. Go check out his firm, DCVC. And as always, I'm your host, Omar Khatib. If you haven't already, share this episode with an entrepreneur, an investor, or a friend. We grow by your recommendations, and give us 5 stars and leave us a review. Until next time, everyone, take care. Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this this episode helped you, send this to somebody who'd really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.